It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Allan Paul Roberts. First, a couple of announcements. You can rent or purchase the Forbidden documentary Doors of Perception right now. Use the link right in the description. You can rent it for only $3, buy it for only $7. Also, if you're ready to start your microdosing journey with the highest quality ingredients available, check out Brainsupreme. Use the link in the description and you get 15% off the entire order. We are booking guests for May. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome Allan Paul Roberts. He is an author dedicated to exposing the globalist agenda to collapse society and usher in a new world order. Allan, welcome. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Chris. Hope you are too.
I am. I'm doing excellent. It's great to have you on. I'm very much looking forward to discussing the information in your book, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything to Usher in a New World Order. Although the title tells us a lot, as you know, there are seemingly endless layers to peel through when trying to understand a lot of this information. And it's only been since 2020 that many people have just started to become aware of some of the surface layers of these operations and agendas. So this is really essential information for not only those just waking up, but for everyone. And there's a lot to get to, but before we do, this is your first time on. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and let the audience know how they can find out more about you.
Sure. Well, I'm a first-time author. I wrote the book, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything to Usher in a New World Order this past summer. I had a unique kind of, I call it a life event in April that happened to me that is the kind of the basis for even attempting to write the book. I run a small business, so I'm pretty busy juggling things like a lot of small business owners are. And then the concept for this book came along. And I pretty much crammed every free moment I could get into it. Kicked it off with 8 nights at the beach to just get away, and then just went like a house of fire all summer long, all weekend, every evening, just about. And got it written in about 3.5 months. So super intense experience. You can check it out at globalcollapsebook.com if anybody wants to jump there and kind of jump in while we're talking about it. There's a tab there for the 11 pillars of society that are the basis for the book that are under attack. That's kind of the thesis of the book. There's 8 pillars of Western society that are all simultaneously under attack. They're in different stages of potentially falling. And the book is kind of a call to action to awaken to what's going on, so that people will be motivated to push back. And I think, we talk about the Great Awakening. I do think that is a real thing. People's eyes are opening really fast on multiple fronts. Just one quick example recently that we're all familiar with is Doge and the revelation of the vast waste in government, the criminal levels of waste. Our tax bill could be less than half of what it is. Imagine that if you paid a tax bill that was 50% lower because they got all the fraud out and the wasted projects and the crazy things we would never want our money spent on. So, I mean, that's just one example of one level of awakening. But yeah, the book goes into these 11 pillars of society. So that's what it's all about.
Excellent. And you mentioned that you're a first-time author, and it was because of recent events that really pushed you to write this book. Would you be able to talk about that? And how long have you been aware of some of the things that you present in the book?
Yeah, I've been just to jump onto that last question first. I've been generally aware of some of the kinds of things that the book talks about. I think I was most, I'll say, disturbed by the news, if you knew where to find it, but the news on how our southern border had been left wide open with no vetting of people coming in. And to me, that just made no sense at all unless they were trying to tear down the country. That's what got me. Like, nobody would do this just to get more voters. I really don't think that's a big enough reason, because you're destroying the country for your children and grandchildren, basically trying to bankrupt the country. No country in the history of the world has left millions of people in unvetted. Now, see, that's the difference, is they're unvetted. So yeah, when they were coming to Liberty Island, in the past, they were vetted. You had to prove you had a job to go to, somebody that was going to support you, that you weren't just going to be a drain on society, that you had a skill, that you were healthy. So just basic fundamental common sense, but not this time, just a mad rush for the border. And I had been aware of the same thing happening in Europe years before. And so that got me curious. So I was curious about some things, but what happened to me in April, I think it was the last Saturday in April, 2024. I woke up around 4 a.m. and I was just laying in bed getting ready, to get up, run to the bathroom, but I'm just laying there, not really thinking of anything, wide awake, didn't have a dream or a nightmare or anything like that. And what happened was I was like suddenly aware of 6 pillars of society that were under attack. And this came in the form of something I've never experienced before or since. It was a simultaneous awareness of all 6 all at once, instantly. It was a level of knowledge that you can't just have through natural means. I mean, it was like you snapped your fingers and you're instantly aware, just like your brain knew it all.
What we call in the metaphysical world a download, really, right?
A download, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've thought about that word, download too, because that's about the only word we have to describe it. But usually in a download, like if you think of the Matrix or something, there's a download. All of a sudden, you know how to fly this helicopter, let's say military helicopter. Right. But even that takes a couple seconds. This was just instantly all there. So it was I call it an instant knowing, right? Mm-hmm. So I was just like kind of blown away by that. And I got up, I was headed into the bathroom, pulled out a piece of paper, a notebook from the top drawer, wrote down these 6 things because I wanted to think about them later. But I also wanted to get back to sleep because it's 4 a.m. So I tried to get back to sleep. I'm laying there, and then I get 3 more the same way. And now I'm like, oh my gosh. And the sense I had was I never thought of it that way. It's like, wow. Wow. And so I got up and wrote them down. And now I'm laying there in bed, like even more wide awake. Now I got 9 buzzing through my head, and then 2 more came. So I wrote them down. At this point, I'm like, all right, what's going on? And, I am a prayerful person, just to be kind of totally transparent about this. Like, I start every day with probably at least 30 minutes of prayer and like silent meditation, right? So I'm used to this method of, I try to reach out to God in a way and just try to get some sense of what I could do this day, right? But I've never had anything like this happen to me. So this was unique, but because I was in that routine of daily prayer, that I just thought this was probably from God. That's the sense I had. And so in my head, I said, God, what's going on? Why are you showing me this? Do you want me to write a book or something? And and I said, and if you wanted me to write a book, what would the title be? And before in my head, the word be could get what would the title, boom, the title was there in the subtitle instantly, not in a sequence of words, just bang, an instant knowing. And I thought, okay, I don't need any more proof. For some reason, you want me to write about these 11 collapse points. Wow. And so I'll do it. And so that's where I got like the fire to put all this time into it, because I had a really core belief that it was being asked, and that I didn't want to blow it, that I wanted to try to do it. So I just researched like crazy, and you just put my whole heart into it. But before I got to that point, there was this moment of, I'll call it intimidation, almost like fear of like, how can I do this? Because this is a super big task and I'm busy. So I just said, how am I going to do this? And the thought instantly came, right from the heart, and it'll flow. So don't try to be something you're not. Don't try to be all intellectual, and just be yourself and let it flow and kind of go with the flow. And that's what I did. And it seemed like I had the 11 collapse points to work from, so I was working backwards. So I'm researching each of the 11, finding out what I can learn, and then putting it together to present the evidence for it. And then in the front of the book, there's kind of like an intro section, a little bit about how the concept came to me, but then what is globalism? Who are the globalists? What do they want? And what are their plans for the world? And can they actually pull it off? I mean, can they actually pull this off? So, and then the 11 collapse points, and then what do we do about it is the final section. How do we prepare? How do we resist? How do we spread the word? How do we try to prevent this from happening? Because I think ultimately that's it. If you think back in the Old Testament, the story of Jonah, and he goes into the city of Nineveh, and he's proclaiming 40 days and Nineveh is going to fall, like the wrath of God's going to come on Nineveh because they were sinful people or whatever. But he's preaching this every day, and then Nineveh doesn't fall because the people repent. Well, I think that's kind of like when God can see something coming. He doesn't necessarily want it to happen, but he can see where it's going if we don't do something about it. And and so that was my sense that, reveal what's going on, try to get people motivated to see it, and then to push back against it.
Excellent. Well, that's a great introduction. And maybe we should follow the same guidelines for the information we're going to present now, starting with what is the end game goal for these parasitic globalists, and to the best we can, identify who these groups are, and then we'll explore those different 11 pillars that you were discussing.
Sure. So the end goal is what they call, we've all heard the expression, the New World Order, which you could think of as a one world government where a tiny group of technocrats are in charge of everything. And the freedoms that we've known in the Western world that we've taken for granted are really no longer part of society. Individual countries may exist in name, but in fact, all the power, all the decisions come from the top. So you could think of it almost as like a United Nations on steroids, where they dictate. They don't suggest, they dictate. And everybody has to fall in line with that. And, to the point where, say, if the World Health Organization, detects or states that there's some new virus or something, and we need to follow some protocol, everybody would have to follow that protocol right down to the last, I that's dotted and T that's crossed. Can't opt out. Countries have nothing to say about it. It's like a dictatorship. And that's really what they're after. And it sounds incredibly sinister and incredibly impossible to pull off. But, when we go through the book, it goes into how much power they have, because how much money they control, and how they control the corporations, almost like in a pyramid top-down format, where corporations own other corporations, and you keep rolling that up. And it turns out that the same small group of individuals or corporations pretty much own everything. And that's why they have so much control.
When we're looking at the faces that are presented, that is most likely surface level puppets, really, that are being used as the face of whatever these operations are. But there seems to be deeper levels and very powerful groups and families that we would probably never even know who they are or know their names, right?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we can know their names. I mean, we know that there's powerful banking families. We hear about things like the Rothschilds and their historical impact on society through the control of the banking system. And there's a small group of banking families that own all the banking power in the world, really at a really high level. And, for example, I'm sure you're familiar with the Federal Reserve isn't really a government agency. It's a separate banking system. It's a private banking system. And so, the Fed and the European Central Bank and the Bank of Japan and all these different banks are all part of a small cartel of high-level banking systems that are owned by a small group of people. So yeah, I don't think we'll ever truly be certain of their names and who's ultimately in charge, because that's the way they want it. There's to that point, there's a section in the book called "Who Owns the World," and in that section of the book, it takes you to a video where in lifetime, the guy takes you through Yahoo Finance and who owns this company and who owns that company, and pretty soon you find out the same people own Coke and Pepsi. They own Airbus and our air systems here. They own both sides of every coin, and it keeps rolling up, and you get to the top, and you're left with Vanguard and BlackRock and State Street, and then you find out that Vanguard really owns the others, but that Vanguard's organized in such a way that you cannot know who owns Vanguard, who has controlling interest in Vanguard. So that's probably whoever's above Vanguard is probably the very core of the world financial power.
Let's talk about the 11 pillars of society that are under attack right now and try to get to as much information as we can with the time that we have.
Okay, yeah, it's not a whole lot of time, but here we go. So this is my little cheat sheet for the 11 pillars of society. You can see the graphic there. Yep. And that's a building with 11 collapsing pillars. So we're going to go through each pillar. And these graphics all come from the book, by the way. So this is number 1, national borders. You can see the torn flag there. This is the most obvious one, and probably the one, like I said, that troubled me the most. We can see our southern border being rushed. I mean, just now recently, with Trump getting into power, that's been cut off dramatically. But we still have, nobody knows for sure, possibly 20 million people who are in the country. And, some portion of those people, it's my belief, just because of the simple odds and the simple fact that we had a wide open border that was unprotected, those two factors alone mean that there has to be some percent of spies, of gangs, of just, bad people that are in here. And if you think about it, they were given cell phones, free cell phones. They were given free room and board. They were flown to wherever they wanted to go in the country, and this was a very organized thing. The book goes into that the UN and the United States itself were funding the flow of these migrants from Central America, an area called the Darien Gap, that we actually had camps that we funded with busing and everything else. Like, you wonder how you ever notice the pictures of these migrants coming across the southern border? They have nice clothes. They look like they just stepped off they look like they just stepped off a bus, probably because a lot of them did just step off a bus, given clothes and backpacks and everything. But yeah, they were funded by our own government. And years before that, following 2011 and the fall of Gaddafi, Libya, and there was one other country in the Middle East that fell too, and Syria. And so you had this rush into Europe between 2011 and 2016. And you might recall that the U.S. was being pressured to take some of those migrants too. And Trump said, no, we're not taking migrants, flooding into Europe. We're not doing that. So he was able to block that for 4 years. As soon as Biden came in, he opened the floodgates, people coming in from 160 countries. But they had an even worse situation in Europe, and they're in a worse situation than the U.S. is now because they've been dealing with it for longer. But it's the same system. Rush the borders in all of Western Europe, in the U.S. and Australia. So these Western nations are all dealing with the same problem at different levels of magnitude, but it's the same coordinated problem going on there. So that's the first one. The second one
basically destabilizes that area and the society surrounding it.
It destabilizes it, and it also starts to dilute your society. Your sense of who you are gets diluted when other societies are coming in and don't even have time to assimilate. Right. So this is kind of related. This is number 2, security and police protection. And they kind of go hand in hand, because if you think about what's happening with the countries being invaded, and then at the same time, you reduce the police protection with the Floyd riots, 2020 BLM riots. The movement started defund the police, reduce the number of police departments, reimagine policing. And just like insane stuff. And buildings burning. There was a shocking video of like a guy just shooting his car out of a camera going down the streets of New York City, Manhattan, and all these buildings boarded up after all these riots, and there was fires everywhere, firebombing. Nobody's going to jail. And so that shows the intent there that, and then we learned later that we had these district attorneys that had been brought in by George Soros that were intentionally soft on crime, right to go with the timing of all this. So yeah, you can steal up to $1,000 in certain cities in California and New York and, the big blue cities all across the country, steal up to around $1,000. Nobody gets punished. Don't go to jail, nothing, just like a free for all. Yeah. So it's this continued destruction of society that ties into police protection, the lack of police protection, and then the district attorneys that are corrupt and won't prosecute certain types of crime.
100%.
Yeah. So number 3 here, privacy. I think we all can kind of relate to that to a point. It doesn't, in a way, take a whole lot of explanation, but some people aren't aware that our cell phones, even when they're turned off, continue to track us. So you can set all you can turn your settings on to no, don't track me, don't track that. But all that does is it stops the advertising trackers. That does not stop Google or Apple from tracking you. And it's been proven in the book. It uses QR codes. You can hold your phone right up to a QR code on the page. You'll go right to a video that'll explain it, or to an article. But yeah, one of the articles goes into great detail on exactly how that happens. So this privacy problem really started right after 9/11, because what happened shortly after 9/11? Well, number one, you had the Patriot Act, which was an excuse to track phone conversations if they were coming in from overseas, to monitor them, to protect against terrorism. All right. Pretty soon, though, that got turned on the American people. It definitely got turned on to Trump, because you can make an excuse that you're concerned about foreign surveillance and then track anybody that you want to. So they turned that on Trump's team. They turned that on the January 6th people. Even the ones who caused no problem, they were just outside, concerned about an election, and they scooped up all their cell phone records, found out who was in the area, and then started throwing them into prison in D.C., some of them for 4 years without a trial, in a nation where we're supposed to be guaranteed a speedy, fair trial of our peers, right. Just totally disregarding the Constitution. But in a similar way, our email is tracked. I mean, obviously, if you have Gmail or Microsoft Office or any system that is on the cloud, you can search your own email, right? You can do a search and it'll pull up content buried within the email itself, not just subject lines. It's digging into there, which means it's read it ahead of time and indexed it, just the way Google indexes a search. When you go to do a Google search, our email's been indexed. So those are just 2 quick examples of the privacy, but we've become acclimated to that, where we accept it much more easily, and Apple Watch is monitoring all kinds of stuff on our bodies and sending that information. And it seems like everybody's okay with that. Like, hey, if I'm not doing anything wrong, I got nothing to worry about. Well, yeah, that's what a lot of the J6 people thought too. They're just, doing the right to petition your government. That's one of the fundamental rights in the Constitution. If we think something's not right, we have that right to question it, and we shouldn't be thrown in jail for it. So that's just an example of how, in the wrong hands, this lack of privacy can lead to unexpected consequences.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to save all the rest of the questions I have till you finish the 11 pillars that you're presenting right now, because there's a couple of things that I do want to get to before we close out today, but I'll let you finish with these first.
Okay, and if you need to speed me through,
oh, you're good.
Free.
You're good.
Okay, all right. So number 4 is banking and finance, and you can see the banker here has these T-bonds and T-notes on his back, and he's kind of getting crushed by the weight of that. And what that's all about is the banks are in trouble, especially the regional banks. The regional banks are in more trouble because they're the ones that have the commercial property loans, the loans for office buildings and factories. Your local business would typically borrow most of the time from a regional bank to build something. Now, these regional banks, what happened is the properties that they're backing with mortgages after the COVID lockdown, people started going into the office less. And now these leases are coming up for renewal, and they don't have enough people in these buildings to pay for the lease anymore, to pay for the mortgage on the buildings. And so the banks are stuck with these failing mortgages that are failing over time because these leases are like, they could be 1, 2, 3-year leases. So they don't all come due at once, but over time, more and more of them are becoming due. And the banks had purchased treasury bills and treasury notes, which are low interest, had been low interest because they lowered the interest rate down so far that you have a T-bill or T-note at, 0.5%, 1%, 2%. And now the Fed raised the rates to like 5%. So these old T-bills and T-notes that they have are worth like less than half of what they were when they got them. And so if they have to cash them in to pay for a building that is no longer occupied, or, to take over a mortgage or whatever, or to give money to somebody who's withdrawing it from their bank account, if they have to cash in the T-bill, T-note, now they're underwater. And so their balance sheets are really weak. So it wouldn't take much of a push to really bring the whole thing down. If you think of like It's a Wonderful Life, and remember George, the banker, and no, I don't have your money. Your money's in his house and in her thing, and that's kind of the way it is. That's where the money is. So when the money's in things that are not worth what they were, now you got a tougher situation. So yeah, it's in a very fragile place. Mm. And if that banking system comes down, the laws are written such that since the 2008 banking collapse, they are now written in such a way that the banks have the legal right to do what's called a bail-in, which means they can take your money to stop them from failing and say, here's an IOU in the form of bank stock. So I just took your 20 grand and I'm giving you 20 grand of bank stock. Have a nice day. And there's nothing you can do about it. Mm. So my personal strategy is spread your money out over several banks. Don't have all your stuff in one bank account. Spread it between banks and credit unions. I'm not a financial advisor, but that's just my common sense approach to it. Mm. But you don't want to be, if it would start to happen, it's probably going to happen quick. So you don't want to be scrambling at the last minute if that were to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I've been doing that very thing, is spreading it out between as many banks as possible.
Exactly. All righty. Here's number 5, the education system. And I think many people's eyes were really opened up during the COVID crisis when they got to watch what their kids were learning through the remote learning, or you could say the lack of learning, mm-hmm. the lack of focus on the core subjects, math, science, reading, even history, civics, just the basic set of things you would think your kids would be learning. You find out that they're learning things more related to DEI and soft skills, not really the deep skills. And this has been going on over decades, the degrading of the American and Western education systems in general. But it's a planned takedown of those systems is what I was able to learn. So, and you have to see the trend. And again, it's this thing that nobody could be that stupid to let this happen unless it was an intentional push. And, there's a lot to back that up in the book. I don't have time to get into all that, but that's the trend. Right on. Number 6 is energy. Mm-hmm. And what we're talking about when we say energy, we're talking about cheap, reliable energy. And, in China, they bring on a new coal plant like roughly every week. They're bringing on coal plants like crazy because that's the cheapest, most reliable form of energy. In our country, we have what's called clean coal. We use coal scrubbers. We can use coal very safely, safe for the environment. But yet we're being told we shouldn't have coal. Obama started the big push against coal. Biden continued that. We've got all this push for electric cars and windmills and, battery powered, but that is not nearly adequate to power a society. It's fine as a side item. Nothing wrong with those technologies, but they don't have the staying power. You can't rely on them at night. You can't rely on them in a cold snap when the sun isn't shining. So there's been that move away from reliable energy. And what can happen if all the world is on electricity and there's no coal and there's no gas, there's no storable energy, then they can turn that energy off at the flick of a switch. They can control your smart thermostat and say, sorry, I know it's cold, but your house is going to be at 62 degrees instead of 72. They can limit how far you can travel. If they can limit how much electricity you can use in your electric car, things like that. So it's basically a method of control.
Not to mention the level of technology that they probably will never let us have access to that provides free energy, and the individuals and groups that were working on things like free energy and happen to be disappeared or suicided or discredited. So the day that changes will be an amazing day.
That is something else. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of one of those rabbit holes people don't want to go down or they don't want to believe is possible. But yeah, I've read plenty. I'm convinced that we could have virtually free energy. You could have something the size of a shoebox that would power your house. Like the technology exists. Yeah. But that would change the world. It would change everything if people had free energy. All right. Number 7 is the environment. And you see this picture of a Volkswagen Beetle. They used to call these the bug. And you see bugs on the bug. And that is kind of just a fun way to introduce this chapter.
Yeah.
When I was writing the chapter, before I did any research, I had this question in my mind because I can't resolve this, or I couldn't resolve it until I did the research. But when I was a kid, and I don't know how old you are, but when I was a kid, if I rode in the car with my parents in the summertime, 20 minutes across town, there would be so many bugs on that windshield if we were driving at night, that by the time you got back, you almost had to use the scraper on the window. Like if you turned the windshield wipers on, it would just smear bugs all over the place and you couldn't see through the glass.
You must have been in the South. I was in Louisiana. I remember that.
Yeah. Well, even in the north, I think if you're east of the Mississippi anywhere, that was kind of the case. But have you noticed in the last 5-10 years, I mean, I can drive 2 hours to the beach and have less bugs on my windshield and on my grill and my headlights.
Well, I moved out to northern Colorado where there's generally less insects to begin with, but I have traveled back to Louisiana, and I did notice a significant decrease in the love bug population, it seems, because we went during that season, and usually the cars are covered, and it ruins the paint job, but not this time.
Right. So that was the question I had in my mind as I started the chapter, and I actually created the graphic before I wrote the chapter because it was just this thing I wanted to find out about. And way late in the chapter, and I really didn't highlight it in the book, but it does mention it, is that a group called Geoengineering Watch, their website is geoengineeringwatch.org. They have discovered through measurement that what they call the flying insect biomass has reduced 75% in the last 27 years. 75% reduction. And, that's just an indicator of the health of the environment. I mean, bugs are a form of life. Birds eat bugs. You got the whole food chain that relies, it's all interconnected, obviously. But what it turns out is that the geoengineering of the atmosphere, of the chemtrails, of what's been found to be in the chemtrails, the Geoengineering Watch was able to acquire the use of a NOAA plane, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration plane. They were able to fly that plane with its sensitive instruments into chemtrails and collect scientific data on the composition of the chemtrails. And what they found is toxic levels of barium, strontium, and aluminum, and a couple other chemicals at the nanoparticulate level. So the particles are so small that they can bridge the blood-brain barrier of animals. They actually harm plant life. They harm trees. And this has been going on for decades now. And they actually found that it's affecting the honeybee population because the aluminum basically gives the bee like a mental problem where they don't really understand what their natural instinct is, and they don't do their job properly. So that's part of the reason the honeybee population is in such decline. So, it's the food, it's what's in the food, it's what's in the soil, it's what's in the air, and even the water. These aren't the things like we test for clean water and clean air, but we don't test for these things. So this isn't even being tested for in what we call clean air and clean water. So, it's a real issue.
There's not much that you can find that doesn't have some sort of toxic fingerprint on it. It's only in remote areas of nature that you will find actual nature anymore because it's all been tainted and everything's been hijacked by these parasites.
Yeah, it's really pretty amazing. All righty, here we go. Number 8 is the medical system. And you see this picture probably from the 50s or 60s of the doctor actually coming to the door. There was actually a day when doctors made house calls. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that, but I can remember as a kid the doctors would make house calls, and doctors would spend time with you. And if you go to the doctor today, it seems like you're on a conveyor belt and they want to get you in and out as fast as possible. It's almost like they're writing the prescription as they're speaking to you. I literally had that happen once. I think I was in and out of there in 10 minutes. And of course, they have the pharmacy on your way out where you can, give them your prescription and they'll fill it for you. Yeah. But, the medical system was changed by John D. Rockefeller. That's what I learned in the research. We used to have all kinds of natural medicine in this country. It was more of a thing than it is today. And he was able to basically get that changed. So now everything's pharmaceuticals, which was in his financial interest as the richest man in the world, an oil tycoon, because almost all pharmaceuticals are petroleum based. So he got petroleum based pharmaceuticals as pretty much the norm. You got one system of medical licensing, which is the AMA. There used to be several different licensing organizations. They enforced this new method of learning of what medical science is all about. They enforced that uniformly through the whole training system, and the whole naturopathic way was out the door. And if you want proof of this, just think in your life experience. If you went to a regular doctor, have you ever been told, hey, maybe you should take more vitamin D or vitamin C or whatever? It's no, here's a prescription. This is what you do. I mean, it's crazy when you think about it. Like, what about getting fresh air and healthy food and avoiding this food or that food, avoiding processed foods, eating more fruit and vegetables? That's never an issue. That's never a topic of conversation ever.
You even mention nutrition to a doctor and their eyes glaze over, and it's like they have a malfunction. They don't know how to respond.
That's true. Yeah, so you can see the system's been corrupted, and so it keeps going from there. I mean, these medical systems have been bought up by bigger and bigger systems. It rolls up to where the standard of care is very top down, and you better not deviate from it, or you could be punished or lose your license, as we saw in the COVID crisis. I mean, doctors who tried to step outside of the norm and prescribe ivermectin or something that was deemed controversial. I mean, some of those were losing their licenses, losing their jobs. They were intimidated into just following this standard of care, which benefited the pharma industry and their expensive pharmaceutical products that really tend to make us sicker. And then they have more pharmaceuticals to treat us. So it's this downward spiral. And I think RFK Jr. is just the right person at the right time to reverse that. I mean, like you said, we spend more per person on the medical industry than any country in the world, and we have some of the worst results because it's been so captured by the pharmaceutical industry. So anyway. All righty. Number 9 is the food supply. And this one's kind of shocking in a way. I mean, we're all having our eyes open to the problem with egg prices lately, which is an indicator of a supply problem. And it turns out that, if you're up on this, then, people would know that millions and millions of chickens have been killed because, someone from the government comes in and does a PCR test, which is questionable in itself. They have no symptoms.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have no symptoms, but the test says you got something. And so kill your flock of 1 million chickens, kill your flock of 2 million, of 500,000, whatever it is. And in the book, it goes through a list of, I would say, about 30 occurrences within 1 year where at least 100,000 chickens or turkey or livestock were destroyed because of these tests, or a plant burned down. We're talking, like 2 or 3 times in the same week, 1 million here, 500,000 there. And Tucker Carlson kind of got me onto this topic while he was still on Fox toward the end of his career there. He did a thing on this, like, what the heck's going on with the food processing plants, because the number of fires and accidents at these plants was all of a sudden 15 times higher than it had ever been in history, like in 2022. And he said, he's like, what is going on with that? He said, we started investigating this. And during the week we were running the investigation, 2 different airplanes crashed into 2 different food processing plants within the same week. And he's like, what is going on? Huh. But yeah, it's kind of shocking. The food, it's not just in the US, it's in Europe. The farmers are really in an uproar in Europe because they're taking their farms, they're taking them offline by the thousands. The Netherlands is the number 2 exporter of food in the world, and their farms are going offline, by the thousands, and the farmers are revolting like crazy over there. But you don't hear much about that in our news.
Right.
All right. So here's where it gets a little unexpected, I would say. Number 10 is self-identity. And this is, especially with the kids, are being taught to question who they are. Are you a boy? Are you a girl? Might you be something different? Have you ever felt like this or that? And so maybe you're a girl, maybe you're a boy, even though you have the other body, that kind of thing, just questioning their identity. That gets to, the core of who we are. That weakens society as we become confused. And, when you do that to a little kid who is so impressionable, to me, that's criminal.
Yeah, you combine that with the pharmaceuticals and the material that they're subjected to through social media, and it's a perfect storm to create these mental issues that the young people are experiencing.
Yeah, exactly. So here's the final one, and this is faith itself. And, if we go back in time, we all kind of know that, prayer was removed from the classroom. We remember hearing that. Maybe some of us are old enough to remember that. The 10 Commandments used to be in schools. The 10 Commandments used to be on the walls in courtrooms. They're still on a couple of them where they fought to keep them. But, this whole Judeo-Christian ethic of what's right and what's wrong, having a standard that law is built on. Western law is actually built on that. Taking that down, questioning it, allowing just this kind of like relativity. Well, you have your truth and I have my truth, and as long as nobody hurts each other, everything's cool. But this sense of, we see the sense of law and order that we talked about in the beginning. Like, you were never allowed to steal anything, and you steal something small, the cop would be on you. Call your parents, you're in trouble. I remember seeing this. I grew up near a city. I would go into town with my friends, every once in a while you'd see some kid that got caught shoplifting over there crying. The cops calling the parents. I mean, that used to happen for tiny stuff, and now it's okay to steal $1,000 worth. It's just kind of crazy. But this thing with faith, the reason it matters so much is that every tyrant knows that if you can destroy a people's faith, you can weaken their will, and they have less courage to stand up against your tyranny, which is why, like in the Soviet Union, they attacked religion so hard, and the same thing in China, because you're either going to be loyal to the state or to God. If you're loyal to God, you're going to be loyal to your fellow man. It kind of takes care of itself. If I'm accountable to God, then I'm also accountable to my neighbor. And that's what makes for a peaceful society, is people trying to act self-policing, if you will. We're self-policing ourselves because we know we're accountable, but they know if they can tear that down, then the state and whatever the government says can become essentially the God and the dictator, and people just roll over. So that's why faith is so important to maintain, as that kind of bastion of resistance, really.
Right, I agree. This is great information. I wanted to get your thoughts on where this Trump administration fits into everything. I always say I remain very cautiously optimistic, but I don't have any emotional investment in politics. I've been an observer for a very long time, a very disappointed observer, and from everything that I've witnessed, it is my personal belief that both sides are still controlled, that there is going to be nothing ultimately beneficial for the people that will ever come out of any political administration. But again, I will gladly take anything good that comes out of the agendas that are coming out of this. And I am not blind to the insane woke agendas that we were subjected to from the left. And to me, again, it could be a problem, reaction, solution, sleight of hand that we're witnessing with Trump. I would hope not. But you also mentioned RFK and some of the things that he proposed, but he also recently came out in support of the RNA vaccines. So there are some things that are being presented with the right hand that are amazing and shiny and wonderful, but other things that the left hand are dabbling in that are very concerning. So I'd love to get your thoughts on where we're at with all of that.
Yeah, I mean, like you, I share some hope there, because I see more courage than I've ever seen before, more of a willingness to take this stuff on, like, head on. I mean, Trump himself being shot once and a second assassination attempt that failed. I mean, having the courage to keep moving forward against court cases and everything else, and being the only president whose fortunes went down instead of up, like most of these corrupt politicians before him, gives me hope that he's in it for the right reason. I mean, that doesn't mean that everything he does is the best move. And I think he probably is making some mistakes, as probably anybody would who was moving at that speed. I mean, my sense is that he understands most of the big picture of the kind of things we talked about here. But he is up against a mountain of resistance. We could call it the deep state, people who are embedded in the government organizations who make a lot of the day-to-day decisions, who spend a lot of the day-to-day, money, and they implement their policies separate from the direct control of whoever's in power. So he's up against that, and they're going to try to sabotage him. Many of them are going to try to sabotage him. So it's all about moving quickly and decisively, and removing people from power and cutting off funding. And so that's kind of what I see. But there's such a web of people up against him that it would be in their interest to do kind of like what you're saying, like, make it look like they're supporting him, but then have some other agenda that could be manipulated to pull control back. So I know it's a judgment call. My sense is that it's a sincere effort. I was disappointed that he didn't come out strongly against the vaccine once we learned about all the vaccine injuries and things like that. I think he should have done that. I'm willing to say, well, possibly it could be that for political reasons he couldn't do that. But I think the jury's out, but I am hopeful because I see this rising awareness. I think number one, people saw how quickly they could shut down the border. I mean, traffic's down 98% in 45 days. And they saw how instantly that if you wanted to control it, you could. So that means the prior administration didn't want to, because they could have done the same thing. All right. So number one, we know that. We see like a really bold attempt to get the finances under control. And we know that the country is going to go down if they don't get that under control, because they've been spending, I mean, the national debt has been rising by $1 trillion every 100 days in the last year or so. So, we were going to go bankrupt. The dollar would lose all its value. I mean, if they don't do something quick to get it under control, that's where we were heading. So I have hope there. It's interesting because on a lot of these 11 collapse points, you can point to some action being taken, or at least some level of awareness in the new administration that gives me hope that they see the big picture and that they're trying to do something about it. But it's a big country with a lot of people in power and a lot of people resisting. So I think it's going to be kind of like a battle, and it's not black or white. I don't see it that way.
Well, the main concerns I have are the willing relationships and agendas that he seems to be putting forward, like with the PayPal mafia, Israel, and Elon Musk. This seems to be a person who wants to roll out a very technocratic system that we're going to be subjected to, and I just hope it doesn't turn into some sort of police state.
Yeah, I agree. The potential is definitely there. In the wrong hands, I mean, the combination of Starlink with all those satellites, and the nanotech I assume a lot of your listeners are aware of this, the nanotech that's shown to be in the vaccines. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you combine that with the 5G, I know for some people this sounds like conspiracy theory stuff, but in the wrong hands, all that technology could do tremendous damage. And so this is a question I like to pose to people. We've seen the tyrants of the past 100 years, Hitler, Stalin, whatever, where they killed millions of their own people, tens of millions. I think it was 70 million in China. It wasn't just the 6 million Jews. I think it was over 20 million people that Hitler killed in his own country, separate from the war. I mean, the government did this to their own people. So my question is, do you think it's less likely that we would have tyrants today than back then? And if so, why? And I say that human nature doesn't change.
Right.
And when people have power, there's going to be a certain percentage of them that are sociopaths. And if you combine technology, the ability to eavesdrop on people, to snoop on people, to watch them through satellites and through phone tracking and the digital behavior online, the leverage that a tyrant could have is unlike anything in history. And so the power that they could have in the wrong hands is more dangerous than anything we've seen in the past. Mm-hmm. So it's always concerning when power rolls up, whether it's Bill Gates or even Elon Musk. You got to always say, can I trust this ultra wealthy billionaire with the power that they have because of their wealth, the power and influence? So it's risky. I mean, power corrupts, the expression. From what I've seen, I'm not convinced that Elon is a real card carrying member of that club, because I see him pushing too hard to try to save the government from falling. And I don't think that's in his interest on a purely raw level. I mean, we see what's happening with Tesla stock dropping like a rock while all this is going on. And, he's not being paid for what he's doing. So I'm hopeful that that we can believe what he says is that, we shouldn't have population reduction. We should be increasing the population. He's come out and said that. I've seen him in interviews and saying, no, I think Donald Trump really is a good man. And, he's trying to save the country. And we need to get behind that, while there's still time. His actions seem consistent with that. It just so happens that he's also got these technologies that could be used the wrong way with the neural link and all this stuff. In the wrong hands, they would be awful. But in the right hands, they could be a good thing.
Well, like I said, I remain very cautiously optimistic, and I hope for the best with everything. For the last few minutes we have, maybe we can offer some solutions for folks, especially those that are just becoming aware of a lot of these things. I can see how it seems like this machine, the system, these parasites, it's too big to fail. How can we possibly stand up against it? But I've seen in my own life the benefits of not participating with the things that don't benefit humanity and focusing on the things that do in your own life, and it can do tremendous things. But what would you offer people?
So I would say the first step is to become aware. Okay, and I mean that's the reason the book was written, is to make it easy to get your arms around the whole range of things that are going on and to become aware of them. So whether you get the book or do it through some other way, become aware. I think get away from just consuming the major news media. And when I say that, I mean even Fox News too. Go beyond that to what's called the alternative media. And the book has tons of QR codes where you can connect to different alternative media to check them out. But you have to get to that, because that is the free press. The alternative media is the free press. The mainstream media is controlled, the controlled press that are owned by the same corporations. So do that. I would say on the financial side, my recommendation, again, spread your money among several bank accounts. And I would say acquire hard assets to the extent you're able to, gold, silver, maybe a gold or silver IRA. Consider that. Pay off your debt as much as you can so that you're not at the mercy. If the system would come down, you're not at the mercy of that as much. I think on a social level, build your friendships, build the family relationships, have people around you can trust, because we need to support each other. And, if this would start to fall apart, we would need each other more than ever, but educate yourself and push back. That is, do what you can to spread the word and raise the awareness. I really think that is the core thing.
Excellent. Allan, thank you so much. This is fantastic information. One more time before we close out, let everyone know where they can get the book and find out more about you.
Okay, you can go to globalcollapsebook.com, globalcollapsebook.com, and you can see some videos, learn more about the book there. It connects to Amazon and Barnes & Noble if you can get it that way too. And for your listeners, there's a hidden link. If you do globalcollapsebook.com/read, you can read the first collapse chapter for free. So Excellent. You can check it out there.
Awesome. Allan, thank you so much. Definitely love to speak again in the future. A lot more we can discuss. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow.
Thanks so much, Chris. Then.
The nature of this experience seems to always be just beyond the reach of our science, technology, and consciousness collective.
There's layers upon layers upon layers.
It does add such an element of mystery to this place.
Why are we here?
We're getting closer to the truth now.
There's too many people experiencing profound interactions with conscious entities.
I'm focused on the non-human intelligence contact phenomenon in dreams. Dreams involve interactions with real entities.
People are waking up paralyzed. They're sensing or seeing something very evil in the room.
I have experienced sleep paralysis. Shadow people start to appear.
I was taken from my earliest memories by non-human alien entities. More and more people are wanting to talk about these things.
A ufologist would say, well, that's obviously an extraterrestrial. And a paranormal researcher would say, well, that's a ghost. Well, what if it's all of those things and none of those things? The entities, the intelligence that was just beyond our understanding.
There seems to be something a little extra that can take forms of anything.
I can't believe what I've seen, but it continues on a daily basis. We're definitely not alone. UFOs, UAPs, portals opening up.
I live with all this supernatural stuff. You kind of grow up with that around here. You see a lot of strange things. I don't like to talk about skinwalkers too much.
I had an experience with a skinwalker entity.
People, they would say they would transform into bears, into wolves. There's these bad things that occur. Ghosts, UFOs, and all types of things coming from somewhere.
Our beliefs, our emotions, and our fears all seem to heavily influence the nature of these experiences.
There is so much more that we just don't have time for in this busy, loud, noisy life that we lead.
All of this is planned. Everything is synchronicity.
There's so much more out there. We really are picking up such a small percentage of the electromagnetic spectrum.
The world is an amazing place.
It feels like we're gods in training.